This is the first time I ever told anyone this story, and it might be my last because they found me. The year was 1994. I was 15 years old who lived in a small town mainly dominated by churchgoers and elderly couples who didn't get along, so there was never much to do. The only things that captured my attention were video games. They were pretty basic at times, but my family wasn't well off enough to buy such a luxury as a home gaming system. It was the middle of summer when talk started to spread of a penny arcade moving into the building where the old videotape store was. My friend and I, we'll call him Terry, were beyond excited seeing as it was a much more economically friendly option for us and our parents to get a chance to play video games straight out of my gaming magazines. The posters all around the town, all bright and playful, detailed that the arcade was to open Sunday at 9 a.m., which was incredibly convenient because Terry and I already planned a sleepover that Saturday night. I brought my magazines to Terry because his mom wasn't willing to spend money on gimmicks like that. We stayed up into the early hours of the morning, flipping through them over and over until we had it drilled every game made today into our heads. Eventually, we both passed out on the floor, lights on, magazines out, and minds full of wonder. I awoke to the sound of Terry's mom leaving for her weekly church service. I looked to the wall and read the clock, 8:06 a.m. Wanting to get there early so we could be the first ones in line, I woke Terry up and told him to get ready. We both took showers and changed out of yesterday's attire into something more fresh and snagged some change that Terry's mom had left out for us on the kitchen counter. Before we ran out the door, I looked at the clock, 8:47 a.m. It took us 10 minutes to walk there. When we approached the lineup at the door, there were only a handful of people there. No kids our age, just some older social rejects who had nothing better to do. We jumped into the line to secure our spots as the 4th and 5th people to enter the arcade. We cupped our eyes against the arcade front window to block our eyes from the sun, and what we saw blew our 15-year-old minds. Rows and rows of arcade games. Something caught my eye though. 2 large double doors with the writing, the virtual reality experience. To hear those words, virtual and reality, in the same sentence back then made absolutely no sense to me. So it intrigued us to the point of making it at the top of our agenda for what to do at 9 o'clock when the doors opened. The arcade games sprung to life in a fantastic display of lights and color, and the doors opened. A bald man with a scar on the side of his head walked out and gestured the small lineup that we could now enter. As I walked past him, he gave me a blank stare that gave me an extremely uneasy feeling. We continued through the doors and into the fantastic space full of lights and sounds that excited Terry and I even more. Without saying a word, we ran into the large double doors and pushed them open. They were surprisingly light, and we both stumbled into the room. There was a bald woman with a scar on her head standing next to the table with the multiple bulky circular gadgets on it. We both stood up straight, slightly embarrassed, and proceeded towards her. She held out her left hand and slightly pointed to the paper on the table with her right. 2 quarters per player for the most immersive gaming experience in this day and age. Fight off the alien race that is attacking the moon base. You are its only hope. Terry took out his mom's coins and handed over $1 in change to the bald woman. She blankly took the money and grabbed one of the bulky circular gadgets on the table, gesturing for us to do so as well. We both grabbed one and watched as she placed it on her head, surrounding it like a helmet. We went to do the same, but she gestured for us not to. She went through a side door and came back with 2 Star Wars blaster-looking devices. Terry and I excitedly snagged it from her hands and examined them in awe. They were surprisingly heavy. The woman pressed a button and a thick metal door slid open. She walked through it and we followed attentively. Walking down a flight of stairs, we came to a long, narrow hallway which led to even more stairs. We came into an incredibly large room. Other than a black and white strip door on the other side of it, the walls of the entire room were covered in a opaque glass-like substance. Terry and I shot each other with an exciting glance and proceeded to the middle of the room. The woman helped us equip the helmets and blasters. We couldn't see anything. Thinking it was some sort of joke, I was about to take off my helmet when it came to life. The screen inside the helmet lit up and I looked around to see a totally different place than the strange room before. We were on the moon, outside a building with a Canadian flag on it. I looked towards Terry and he was in the astronaut suit bearing the same blaster as before. I heard a screech ring throughout my helmet that made Terry and I jump. Sound on the moon? Ah, well, it was a video game after all. We turned around to the origins of the horrible sound to see what I can only describe as a true monster. It was lengthy and crawled on 4 legs. My first thought was its face was made up of only 2 deep black holes presumed to be eyes. It looked sickly and injured as it moved towards the 2 of us. Its face opened to form a mouth that bore rows of razor-sharp teeth. It paused its advance and stood up on its hind legs, exposing claws that looked like as if they could slice through human flesh like butter. It lunged towards me with surprising speed. I froze. Time felt slow as I watched the monster gracefully soar through the air towards me, mouth open and claws outstretched. It was suddenly violently knocked to one side as a rod of red fire blew a chunk out of its torso and sent it flying. I looked at Terry and saw his barrel smoking. This brief moment of surprise was interrupted by more shrieks from other monsters arising in the distance. Shaken up from almost losing the game in its first moments, it took me a second to understand the situation. Protect the space station, kill monsters, stay alive. Easy enough. A burst of adrenaline hit me as the monsters came into view over the craters and hills. There were at least 20, and they weren't crawling like the last one, but rather running towards us on 2 legs, spastically waving their claws around every limb on their bodies, seemingly twitching every second or 2. Without any hesitation, Terry and I started to use our weapons against them. They got about 10 meters away before the last one collapsed to the ground motionless. More monstrous screams came from behind, nearly upon us. Too many to specifically say. Terry and I began to fire uncontrollably into the mob of creatures as they stampeded towards us. Terry was firing at the ones in front of me, as was I. I realized too late Terry's actions were foolish, as a monster poured onto him, covering him from view. He screamed in pain, firing wildly into the crowd of creatures. I managed to take down enough of them that they started to back up, realizing that I was a threat. They crawled back over the hills and craters, revealing Terry's body motionless on the ground. I had stared at him for a minute or so, contemplating what to do, when a much deeper, groggy shriek echoed through the air. I turned to see a creature, larger than others, slowly striding on 2 legs across the lunar surface towards me. Its claws were noticeably longer, and its teeth were curled inwards. I switched my focus from Terry to the monster, and just as I did, it stopped advancing on me. It turned to the right and started walking towards the horizon. It stopped, lifted up its nightmarish claws, and slashed into nothing. But as it did this, what I can only describe as a rip in the air formed. It kept striking until the rip turned into a hole. It disappeared into the hole. I stood there confused. I heard screams both from humans and ruined electronics. For a split second, the message was displayed in front of me. Then everything went dark. I waited a few moments before taking off my helmet, and I saw what I can only describe as absolute carnage. Creatures with chunks blown out of them were scattered everywhere across the large room, surrounded by pools of yellow ooze. I looked to my feet to see Terry laying on the ground with various lacerations littering his body. Crouching down, I took off his helmet. He was dead. The shock of my best friend's death was interrupted by the walls opening and more monsters surging out. Instinctively, I raised the blasters, started firing. It worked just as well as it had in the game. Dropping them as they came out of the hole kept them at bay. Finally, they stopped coming. I stared at the gap of the wall. No more emerged from the darkness beyond the glass opening. I looked around the room to notice that the black and red striped door had been ripped down. Realizing that this was my only exit, I moved to it and walked through the remains of the door. I was now in some sort of control room. The bald male bodies were scattered across the room, with blood covering most of the floor. All the electronics in the room had been destroyed, all bearing huge claw marks. The silence of the room was interrupted by movement behind me. The largest of the creatures emerged from the dark hallway, hunched over to fit through the gap. Burying teeth and claws, it approached with the same deep, groggy scream I had heard before. Without even questioning my actions, I pulled out my blaster and sprayed across the room at the horrifying creature. It cowered in the darkness from which it had come. and I heard it scamper down the hallway until the sound faded to nothing. I walked towards the darkness, blaster drawn, and was swallowed by the darkness. I felt my way through the black hallway and up the staircase for what felt like an eternity, occasionally feeling long scratches in the walls left by the monster. Low groans and metallic bangs echoed through the unexplored corridors. My curiosity cut short when I turned a corner to see a light coming from a smashed window high above the floor. The wall and the floor was littered with long scratch marks, yellow ooze, and broken glass. I moved up to the staircase to come into a small room filled with blasters and a slightly open door. Peeking through, I saw the woman who had directed Terry and me into this horrible mess. I burst through and aimed my blaster and held the trigger until she was unrecognizable. My mind was numb with the pure rage of my best friend's death. From nowhere, more bald men swarmed to the scene. I stood there with cuts, bruises, yellow ooze, and blood covering my body as they all blankly stared at me. Shoving through the crowd, I ran out of the arcade, blaster in hand. That was 21 years ago, and the bald scar man had been pursuing me ever since. I often think about the time Terry and I spent in that game, how it could have played out so differently. If not for him, we both would have died in that horrible place. I've tried telling others, but I gave up long ago, for everyone thinks I'm mad. I went out west to the coast, but it doesn't matter how far I go. They always seem to catch up to me. I'll see them walking out on the streets, in the restaurants, even on the TV. I swear one of them looks like Terry. Sometimes at night I hear the shrieks of that monster in the distance. I fear that my time may be short. As I write this, there is a bald, scarred man sitting under the light of the bus stop across the street, blankly staring at my house. I can hear scratching noises at my back door, accompanied by the occasional low groggy moan. I'm going to die here. And that was the new arcade in town. It's definitely a 7 or a 6. It was decent. The creepypasta has a couple of misspellings, but I kind of knew what was going on. But when it comes to the story itself, I thought it was kind of okay. I wish there was more questions about why are they using an arcade to funnel people into this weird bald scar group. And what about the monsters? Are they like part of the bald men, or like are they captive? Like I don't really understand that part, because in the creepypasta there's a scene where there's a bunch of dead bald men, and it's not really clearly explained on what's the relationship between these monsters and the bald men. But if I want to play devil's advocate and sit on the fence, I think just having it not explained pretty much adds a lot more to it. Mainly because you can pretty much make your own theories on what's the relationship between these monsters and the bald men, or what's the bald men's motive. Is it kind of like They Live kind of situation, like it's like aliens but they're like disguised as humans? I don't know, and I think we'll never know. But that's all I got for you. Like, comment, subscribe, skiddly bobbly boop. I'm out.